Hey, y'all. Let's get the housekeeping out of the way. Y'all know that this is not a news story. This episode is fact-based and the timeline kept as accurate as possible. This was compiled from a lot of sources, news articles, investigative reports, arrest records, and court records. So, get you some sweet tea, take up whatever needlework you have going, and settle in for a story. In this episode, I have for your consideration the case of Todd Kohlhepp, who later became known as the Amazon Review Killer. He was born Todd Christopher Samsell, March 7th, 1971. And y'all know Pisces. We love Pisces. They're creative, intuitive, and capable of a long and in-depth conversation. But let's flip Todd's Pisces pancake and see what he was dealing with. Overly sensitive, moody, dodges responsibility, thinks the world owes him a living, weak-willed. I could go on, but y'all get the picture. This guy is an American episodic eliminator and kidnapper who got himself convicted of taking the lives of 7 people in Spartanburg County, South Carolina between 2003 and 2016. On top of that, he kidnapped and brutalized at least 2 women and claims that there have been many more. Now, there are words that YouTube doesn't like to hear too often, so I'm going to try to avoid them without losing too much context. It's their platform. I'm not going to throw down with them about it. Besides, we don't know who all is listening to these episodes, and we do know that children pick up habits bad enough. I don't have to be a part of it. He was born down in Florida but raised between South Carolina and Georgia. His folks split when he was about 2 years old. Mama got custody and got herself hooked up with another man within the year. Later, psychology reports show that this little boy had a very unhealthy relationship with his stepfathers and was always asking to go live with his bio dad, who, by the time he started asking, he had not seen in 8 years. Todd Kohlhepp was a little shit right out of the chute, even back in nursery school. He was always picking fights, hurting other children, tearing up their stuff, stealing their things. I think one of the quotes about him was a tornado through a trailer park, and he was eventually kicked out of nursery school. By the time he hit 9 years old and had started seeing psychiatrists and psychologists, they were calling him explosive and saying he was fixated on adult matters and materials that had no business in the hands or mind of a child. I don't know where he got his hands on those types of reading material. I'm kind of thinking that supervision wasn't the first thing on anyone's mind. But when a child is exposed to certain things out of context, and I assure you, little Todd was not reading the fine print that says for consenting adults. He started making up his own narrative and seeing that objectifying people and making up his own version of how intimacy works. And he just, made a storyline and went with it. He also had a real mean streak when it came to cruelty to animals. He shot a dog with a BB gun and killed a goldfish with Clorox. There were other instances, but this is what I could find that holds up. His excuse about the fish was that he was trying to clean the tank. Bleach is a cleaner. He was a little kid. What does he know? Also, he's a troubled kid with access to caustic chemicals. Again, I'm thinking supervision wasn't the first thing on this parent's minds. I watched an interview where he was telling about it, and he was making too much eye contact, wide eyes open, looking for approval. He was trying to convince people that he wasn't that type of person, but he never did deny what he did to the dog. One of his daddies said the only feelings that boy could muster were anger and pure madness. Context wasn't provided to differentiate the kind of madness it was. Was it the kind of mad where he'd get upset and throw a tantrum? Or was it the kind of mad that means you've lost your mind? Things got to the point where Todd Kohlhepp ended up spending 3.5 months in a Georgia psychiatric hospital because he couldn't, quote, get along with other children. Around the age of 8 or 9, they put him in the Behavior Evaluation Center at the Georgia Mental Health Institute. I tell you what I know about 8, 9-year-olds. They can be assholes. Kids can be assholes to each other, to adults. They're doing a lot of growing and changing. But I do know and feel very strongly that there must have been something else going on, because a regular old ornery 8-year-old doesn't get sent to inpatient care for can't get along. But as the context goes on, you might see that it might be just another parental figure's handoff. Later on, they diagnosed him with a borderline personality disorder. Well, ain't that surprising? That's the kind of condition that can mess with how you handle your emotions, how you get along with other folks. All these troubles he had growing up, and now he's dealing with some mental issues. I'm not sure it affected him in any kind of negative way. It was the people around him that were dealing with the negative effects. It's pretty clear that we're getting signs of the violent mess that he would become. Here's another thing I found out. The public can only go so far until it becomes a legal matter. So unless you have a parent on board that's willing to help continue getting a child therapy and keeping them on track, there's really nothing the public systems can do until he hurts somebody. And then it's an issue. Eventually, Todd did wind up moving to his father's in Arizona in 1983 after his mother and current stepfather had separated. He took his father's surname and began to work a number of the local jobs like kids do. But riddle me this, and if y'all know, please tell me. If his parents were together at the time of his birth, why didn't he have his daddy's name? Now, that may be an old-fashioned notion, but I get that. Here in Texas, you can give your kids any last name you want. Maybe his mama was jerking daddy's chain. Maybe she smelt was cooking and did that for custody purposes. Maybe she just, did because she could. But he did eventually take on his father's name. He also inherited his father's hobby of collecting weapons and was taught by his father to blow things up and to make bombs. Despite of all this bonding, their relationship did sour because Dad kept running around with a bunch of girlfriends. And Todd kept saying that he wanted to go back to his mother, although she reportedly made a whole bunch of excuses not to take him and that he should stay there a little bit longer. And here's what that little bit longer did. On November 25th, 1986, 15-year-old Todd Kohlhepp kidnapped 14-year-old girl in Tempe, Arizona. He threatened her with a .22 caliber revolver, brought her back to his home, tied her up, taped her mouth shut, assaulted her, and then afterwards walked her home and threatened to kill her entire family if she told anyone about what happened. But she did, she told, and Kohlhepp was charged with kidnapping and assault and committing a dangerous crime against a child, as a child himself. Okay, in 1987, Maricopa County Judge C. Kimball Rose ordered that Kohlhepp's case be transferred out of the juvenile justice system because his offenses had been committed in an aggressive, violent, and obvious premeditated and willful manner. But you know what his mom said? His mom said he was a good boy because he walked her home after. Jesus. Some people. So he pled guilty to the kidnapping charge, and the other charges were dropped. He got himself 15 years in prison and had to register as an offender. Court records show that Kohlhepp was diagnosed again with a borderline personality disorder, but had an above-average IQ of 118. Kids at his age usually have about 88.5, so he's a bright child. Not every person dealing with a mental or emotional trouble is going to turn into some kind of monster. That is simply not true. But childhood trauma, neglect, and neglect is a type of abuse that's pretty serious. Being left to fend for yourself and being kicked around from place to place between people that don't seem to really want you or want to do much with you. Some sources said that Todd actually has it wired into his DNA that his brain just wasn't right. It seems like the intervention that he had had earlier either wasn't followed up on or didn't stick. And the judge in his case said that Kohlhepp is very bright and should be academically advanced, but he is behaviorally and emotionally dangerous and likely could not be rehabilitated. Kohlhepp's probation officer wrote a similar description in court papers and added that Kohlhepp felt the world owed him something. The defense attorney added in that same case when defending him, "We don't believe that this client would go on to harm others." Boy, were they deluding themselves. During his imprisonment, Kohlhepp was initially cited for a bunch of violations that included some violent behavior. After he turned 20, however, he had no other records of disobedience, so he was growing up in prison. In 1987, Kohlhepp entered prison in Arizona to serve his 15-year sentence. Between 15 and 29, kids do a lot of growing up and a lot of maturing. I know 29 is not really a kid, but the older I get, the younger they are. And emerging into adulthood and the beginning of becoming who you are going to be. You are not the person at 29 that you were at 15. In that time, you learn how to make your life choices, and he didn't. In prison, the choices are made for you. He didn't have any of those milestones of prom and graduation, marriage and kids. He missed all of that, and it might be just as well. We don't know how any of those situations would have turned out. In 2001, Kohlhepp was released from prison after serving his time. All of it. No parole required. When Todd got out in 2001, he went to South Carolina to live with his mama. But here's the thing. The boy didn't waste his time behind bars. I guess after he got himself, got his head around it, he got himself a bachelor's degree in computer science from Central Arizona College. I'll give him that. He made an effort. Once he got settled in South Carolina, he landed a job as a graphic artist, and he worked there for a couple of years, but he wasn't done with his education. He enrolled at Greenville Technical College and then transferred to the University of South Carolina upstate later that year. He walked away with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Marketing. Now, that's a heck of a turnaround story from juvenile detention to prison to college graduate with 2-3 degrees under his belt. Makes you wonder what might have become of him if he had stayed the course, but then I probably wouldn't be here telling you his story. I don't know, I might have been. Maybe I ought to do some success stories as well. Well, despite being a registered offender, Todd somehow managed to sweet-talk his way into getting a real estate license. The man flat out lied about his felony conviction, and he built himself quite an operation. He had a real estate agency with 12 agents working under him, and he was good at it too. He became one of the top sellers in the Carolinas. But that wasn't going to last. I'm not going to try to get too far ahead of myself, but there were some people in business dealings that picked up on some big red flags. A woman who sold her house to him said he seemed professional enough, but had a habit of talking about guns and making inappropriate comments and double entendres. Another woman who worked with another employee said he was downright nasty, angry, and condescending. And get this, the banker who worked with him and did his mortgages and stuff said that the man would sit and watch adult videos right there at work. Even the staff at the Waffle House couldn't stand him. One waitress flat refused to take his orders, and she would have the male cook go deal with him instead. Now, that don't tell you something. I'm sure that the ladies at Waffle House see a lot of different kinds of people. But she was right to trust her gut. If your gut tells you something, go on and listen. In 2003, about mid-May, here's one that he was suspected of, but there was never enough proof. But in the court of public opinion, his ass is guilty. Somebody walked into the Blue Ridge Savings Bank in Greer, South Carolina. That's about 45 minutes from where he lived, and they robbed the place. 3 folks ended up dead, a bank teller and 2 customers. So let's move on to what we can prove. Kohlhepp said this whole mess started when he bought a motorcycle from Superbike. That's a shop in Chesney, South Carolina, back in '03. At the time, he was a 32-year-old who had laid out $9,000 for an '03 Suzuki GSX R750. This was on April 16th. Now, since the world owes him something, might he have done the robbery for the money to get the bike? Why would he have spent his own money? Is this part of the entitlement that he felt for having been locked up so long? That's the public opinion and not provable. I also want to think about where he got the $9,000. That was a lot more money then than it is now. And even though he was working and living with Mama, probably not contributing, that's still a lot of money. Just something to think about. But over time, he became a disgruntled customer. He had been in that shop several times. Now, here's what Todd's mama said. He had tried to return the motorcycle, but the employees just laughed it off. They're not in the business of taking used bikes back. She said they made fun of her little boy and made him so mad he couldn't let it go because he wanted a smaller bike, wanted to trade in what he had. The fun was being poked at him for not being man enough to handle what he bought. But here's what I know. A 750 Cruiser might be a manageable bike for some. You should probably start them a little smaller, but a 750 sport bike is a whole lot different, and that might be too much for a beginner. So rather than learning to ride the bike through lessons and on a closed track, he chose violence. I might also add that Todd is not a small person. A smaller bike wouldn't have made him happy either, and he'd have been pouting all over again. His height and weight is listed at 5'10" and 280. On a smaller bike, he would have looked like a pit bull on a piss ant. Well, wouldn't you know, the bike in question was stolen from his apartment complex just 13 days later. And what did the dealership have to do with that? Well, Todd says everything. So he went back to the shop again and claimed that they were being rude to him again about the whole situation. He made sure that his neighbors knew that he suspected the bike shop were the folks behind the theft. And apparently no one saw the bike get stolen. Now, if he was as smart as he's being given credit for in some instances, why wasn't there any theft insurance on that bike? And he would have taken that money, the insurance money, and repurchased something more appropriate to what he wanted. But no, none of that happened, and I think that this was all a made-up story, and I don't know where that bike eventually wound up. Less than 7 months later, on November 6, 2003, he walked into that same shop and shot 4 people dead. The craziest part is even though he was a documented customer, no one ever questioned him about the murders until he killed 3 more people nearly 13 years later. So here's how that unfolded. A customer walks into the Superbike Motorsports in Chesney and finds 4 folks shot dead. The victims were Scott Ponder, age 30, service manager Brian Lucas was 29, mechanic Chris Sherbert, 26, and Beverly Guy, age 52. Miss Guy was Mr. Ponder's mother. and all 4 of them were dead from multiple gunshot wounds. Now, before Todd confessed to this whole mess, investigators had sorted out that the gunman had come through the back with a pistol and, in this order, killed Sherbet while he was working. He got Miss Guy in the middle of the showroom, Lucas at the front door, and Ponder out in the parking lot. Y'all, they found 18 shell casings from a 9mm at the scene, some brass and some nickel. Over the years, law enforcement has tested 27 different confiscated guns trying to match those casings, and even sent them away to England to see if they had this new technology that could pull any fingerprints. When Kohlhepp did make his eventual confession, he did know a lot of the details, so that can be held up as true. So this first incident that I just told you all about does not make him a serial assassin. It makes him a spree killer. Now, what makes him into a serial is coming. So hang around and I will get to the whole story, I promise you. So not only is Todd Kohlhepp a spree killer, but he later becomes a serial. About 4 months later, in March, he got himself a private pilot's license from the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, generally, having a felony conviction does not prevent one from obtaining a pilot's license, unless it's related to drugs or alcohol. However, kidnap and assault are still allowable. I'm going to have to sit with that for a minute. You probably won't work for an airline, but you can still have your private license. In May, see, he's not even slowed down by this. He applied for his South Carolina real estate license and had to explain that kidnapping conviction from Arizona. And he also opened up his own real estate firm, running it right out of his home. But anyway, only about 3 weeks after applying, he got his license. And when he filled out the application, he had to explain his criminal past. And he told the officials that the Arizona case was his only conviction and that he'd been working really hard to stay on the right side of the law and help his community since then. In this letter, Todd Kohlhepp swears and avows that he got charged with kidnapping just because he was a minor carrying a gun during a spat with his girlfriend. He says, and I quote, "I was charged with a felony of kidnapping due to the fact that I did have a firearm on me, regardless that she didn't know it. And I had told her not to move while we talked this out." Now that doesn't make any sense. He had a gun on him, and he told her not to move. She must have known that he had a gun, or she'd have probably run like hell, but that's just what I'm thinking. He continues to write that at this time, Arizona was coming down very hard on minors and anything to do with firearms due to heavy gang activity out there. And he says, "I received a sentence of 15 years for which I served every day, no parole required." So we don't hear much from him for another 8 years. Now, did he take a break or did nobody find him out? May 2014, he bought himself a 95-acre spread near Woodruff for $305,000. Now, here's where things get darker than a new moon. Court records show that this rural property in South Carolina is where authorities found 2 bodies and rescued 30-year-old Kayla Brown from what he had put her through was hell on earth. Kohlhepp, standing 5'10" and around 300 pounds by this time, had a whole arsenal of guns on that land. Barry Barnett, the 7th Judicial Court solicitor, told the judge that this old boy had been doing plenty of target practicing out there. There were shells and discarded targets everywhere, especially near a 2-car garage on the property. He appears to be a very good shot from looking at the shooting that he had done and them finding the targets. That's what Barnett said. On August 31st, 2016, Kayla Brown and her boyfriend Charles David Carver, went out to clear brush on one of Kohlhepp's properties. They never made it home. Carver was later found shot to death on that land. Something was not sitting right with Charles's mother, and a mother's heart knows. Joan Shiflett hadn't heard a word from her son, Charles Carver, since the 29th of August. She had texted him about Gene Wilder's passing away and sent her condolences because Charles was a big fan. He texted back one word, damn. After that, nothing but silences. Her calls and messages went unanswered. At first, she figured he was pulling some long shifts at First Quality Enterprise. That's a tissue plant over in Anderson. 12 hours in the printing division had left him covered in ink, hands and clothes both, and he joked about being a writer in his spare time and trying to figure out a way to use all that ink somehow. And, well, Mom is trying to thank the best. He's probably awake when I'm sleeping and sleeping when I'm awake, Shiflett told herself as the days dragged on. That's why we keep missing each other. But wouldn't she have seen a missed call on her call logs? But that's when the worry got too heavy, and she called girlfriend Kayla Brown and couldn't reach her either. So she asked the manager at the Anderson Crossing Apartments to check on their unit, the place her son shared with Kayla, and the manager said it looked like nobody had been there in a long time. So that worry inside of her, that feeling in a mother's heart, would not quit. She carried on. It's a feeling you get, Miss Shiflett said. Can't explain it, but it's as real as breathing. You know when something's wrong with your kids. You know when you don't want to know. Even when your head's trying to convince you that everything is fine, your heart knows. Interest in Brown and Carver's disappearance grew some after those peculiar posts started showing up on Carver's Facebook. Folks started wondering if he had gotten his account hacked. On November 3rd, authorities found Miss Brown chained to the wall inside a metal storage container on Kohlhepp's property. They'd tracked down the couple's last known cell phone signals, and they heard banging noises coming from inside the container. Searching the property, they found Carver's vehicle hidden in a ravine and covered up with brush. Brown told investigators she'd watched Kohlhepp shoot Carver. According to Kohlhepp's mother, Carver was killed for having a really smart mouth that her son didn't care much for. Kohlhepp claimed that he'd kept Brown alive because she hadn't really done anything wrong, but Brown told police he killed Carver because he was mad at her. During her captivity, Brown was repeatedly assaulted and intimidated into not escaping after being shown the graves of Kohlhepp's other victims. 2 more bodies turn up on the property following the arrest on November 6th and 7th. They were identified as Johnny Joe Coxey, age 29, and his wife, Megan Lee McCraw Coxey, age 26, from Spartanburg. The couple had been reported missing back in December of 2015 after allegedly being hired to work on Kohlhepp's property. McGraw-Coxey had been shot in the head around Christmas, while Coxey had been killed a week earlier with a gunshot to the torso. The county coroner identified them through their extensive tattoos. Kohlhepp was arrested right after Brown's rescue. He confessed to the Chesney shootings and the Coxey murders in exchange for being allowed to talk to his mom, to give her a photograph and transfer money from his big account to a kid's college fund. A friend's kid, not his kid. I don't think he had any kids. Now, here's how the arrest went down. Todd Kohlhepp met those investigators outside before they even had a chance to knock on the door. His gut was hanging out below that blue t-shirt he'd later be wearing in his mugshot. Yes, sir, Kohlhepp said as Spartanburg County Sheriff's Detective Tom Clark walked up on the sidewalk. Been a while, Clark said, because they used to be neighbors. It was just past 8 in the morning, November 3rd. Clark quickly announced why there was a whole crowd of officers out there. 2 Spartanburg County investigators had come to help Anderson Police Detective Charlene Easel with a couple of missing person cases. They didn't mention that during those 40 minutes standing outside his house was that happening simultaneously at Kohlhepp's 95-acre wooded property near Woodruff. The team had met the day before with search warrants and laid out their plan. Half would hit the secluded property, half would go to his house. While they stood there just shooting the breeze, Easel asked questions about the missing couple, Kayla Brown and Charles David Carver. She revealed that they knew the couple's cell phones had last pinged on the Woodruff land. Kohlhepp said that he did know Brown, that she'd clean houses for his real estate outfit from time to time. He claimed that on the day they went missing, Brown and Carver had spent about an hour on his property trimming trees, but took off because it got too damn hot. Well, investigators knew that was bullshit. Cell phone records showed the couple had been on his property a whole lot longer that day. Easel kept hammering him with questions. What were they driving? Did they leave them on the property? Had he tried reaching any of them since? Well, every damn time Kohlhepp would go off on these long-winded tangents about his property, his real estate company, Todd Kohlhepp and Associates clearing trees, dangerous bush hogs, unreliable workers, renters always bitching about something. Now, don't that have a John Wayne Gacy vibe? Same thing, always bragging about what they've got, trying to detract and defer from the actual questions. Yeah. Then at one point, Kohlhepp said he knew exactly why they were there. Y'all are trying to find the girl, he said. Not knowing Carver was already dead, Clark responded, we're trying to find her and her boyfriend. The search of the property turned up a whole arsenal. 9mm pistols with suppressors, semi-automatic rifles, and God couldn't count how much ammunition, since there wasn't any record of a background check under Kohlhepp's name, because there couldn't have been. Investigators knew that these weapons were acquired through some shady back channels. Here's a little side quest, y'all. Dustin Lawson, a fellow who knew darn well that Kohlhepp was a convicted felon, got himself in a lot of trouble for buying the firearms and silencers on Kohlhepp's behalf. From 2012 to 2016, Lawson admitted he had purchased at least 12 guns and 5 silencers by lying through his teeth and saying it was for himself. Well, he pleaded guilty to 36 federal firearm charges and got himself 8 years and 3 months behind bars, which he did at Butner Medium Security, walked free in November of 2023. You ready to have your skin crawl? Shortly after they hauled Todd into the slammer, authorities stumbled across something that would make your skin crawl, like I said. Turns out this fella had been leaving what looked like joking product reviews on Amazon under the name Me. But bless your heart, these was not typical customer feedbacks. He had reviewed a padlock saying, solid locks. I have 5 on a shipping container. Won't stop them, but sure will slow them down until they're too old to care. For a folding shovel, he wrote, keep in car for when you have to hide bodies, and left full-size shovel at home. Does not come with a midget, which would have been nice. On the reviewer's wish list, he's listed right there as Todd Kohlhepp. Other gems included, it's blacker than my soul and priced right. And I haven't stabbed anyone yet, but when I do, it will be with a quality tool like this. Now, y'all, these reviews for padlock shovels, tasers, and gun accessories are exactly the kind of tools he used to Yeah, and they can be linked to at least 5 of his killings. But there's where things get even more chilling. After his arrest, Kohlhepp told his mama there were way more victims than anybody knew about. When she asked how many, his response was, "You do not have enough fingers." During questioning, he even claimed that he'd shot someone out in Arizona and they needed to look a little farther back, but he wasn't saying anything else. The Tempe police took what he was saying seriously and started digging through 3 decades of unsolved homicides. While meeting with his mom, he reportedly confessed to the killings and kidnappings, and then he came clean about the Chesney shootings and spilled all the details that had not seen the light of day. They said they'd focus on cases from 83 to 86 when Kohlhepp was living with his daddy, and also between 2001, when he finished up his sentence, and November 2001, when he moved back to South Carolina. Oh boy, he's been busy. So police and investigators in Greer, South Carolina are starting to put their case together. They announced Todd Kohlhepp as a person of interest in the bank robbery that we talked about, the triple homicide that happened at the Blue Ridge Bank. They still hadn't nailed down any real connection, and there was denials all around. So in December 2017, this sorry excuse for a human being had the big brass balls to reach out to the Spartanburg Herald-Journal bragging that there were more bodies out there that nobody'd stumbled across yet. Can y'all imagine how that went over with folks trying to sleep at night missing people, family, friends? Oh my gosh. Well, the wheels of justice did start turning with indictments for the 4 murders tied to the Chesney superbike incident and 1 count of kidnapping for Miss Brown's ordeal. Then the charges started rolling in a little faster. 3 more murder charges for taking out Carver and the Coxies, plus another kidnapping charge and 3 counts of packing a firearm during violent crimes. When his court date came up on January 2017, his lawyers threw in the towel and waived their right to even show up. Meanwhile, the families of the Chesney victims filed a wrongful death suit looking for some kind of compensation for their devastating losses. As reported by WLTX, Brown also went after the bastard in her own civil action. So his guilty plea was kind of a turning point in this long story. He confessed to 7 murders, 4 from the superbike incident that made him a spree killer, and 3 for the discovered bodies on his property, along with 2 charges of kidnapping and 1 of that kind of assault. His deal was backed by a surviving victim, but this still got him 7 consecutive life sentences without parole, avoiding the endless appeals that come with a death penalty case. So it did give the grieving family some semblance of resolution while sidestepping all the delays with the capital punishment system. Now, it was made worse at this time by the drug shortages and the drug companies not wanting their product to be associated with lethal injection. So, yeah, the agreement threw out all chances for appeal or release, but kept one big condition. If Kohlhepp ever broke any part of the deal, the death penalty was back on the table. There's a whole bunch of details about other murders he's confessed to that are being kept under wraps, even as late as August 2018. Kohlhepp is locked up at Broad River Correctional Institute, serving a sentence that doesn't come close to compensating society for the evil that he is. Nothing can ever make up for the pain that he's caused. And here's what I'm looking forward to learning. If he is convicted on further charges. Is the death penalty back on the table for those charges? Because the agreement that he signed covered the crimes that he committed thus far. So once they figure out that he did something else, are they going to give him a date with the needle? I look forward to knowing that, and I'll update you as soon as I do know. 16 years after her husband was gunned down in a motorcycle shop in Chesney, Melissa Brackman and her teenage son were face to face with the killer inside a Spartanburg courtroom. And what Kohlhepp was privileged to hear was a resounding message of forgiveness. Brackman, her son, Kohlhepp, and family members of other victims were in court for 2 damage hearings in the wrongful death suits. In light of Kohlhepp's murderous path, the killings became notorious in South Carolina and have gone unsolved for 13 years. But now he's at Broad River, a level 3 maximum security prison down in Columbia. That's where they put the worst of the worst, folks with long sentences and violent histories. If you act up in other facilities, this is where you'll end up. They keep inmates in single and double cells to make sure there is tight security, but we know what happens in double cells. And death inside is not uncommon. In August 2020, some of Kohlhepp's items and property holdings were auctioned off and the money given to the families. Todd Kohlhepp's mother, Regina Tague, went on CBS's 48 Hours and had the gall to say that her boy is just very misunderstood and he's not a monster. She told them, "I know that's what they say, but he is very misunderstood. Todd is not a monster, not even close. He wasn't doing it for his enjoyment. He was doing it because he was mad and he was hurt." End quote. And I need to just walk away from that too. So tonight, let's light a candle for his victims, 7 souls whose lives were cut short by his violence, and we hold space for Kayla Brown, who survived hell itself. We send energy into the dark for the names we may never know, because when a man tells his mama you don't have enough fingers to count the victims, we can't help but wonder how many more families are still waiting for answers that will never come. So rest in peace, all y'all taken too soon. Until next time, be safe out there. Sweet dreams. See you next week.